Ladies and gentlemen, hello, my name is David Connery, and as Dubbo said, Andy Habig's joining me today as Director of Joint Experimentation. It's great to be here to be able to talk to you about what we do and what we fit and how we fit in to the force design effort. Once we get the slide there. What I'd like to do is just impart three key messages to you. Firstly, about our branch. And our branch helps generate ideas and evidence for force design. Ideas and evidence. Also, too, that we are really on a bit of a journey ourselves. So what I want to be also able to impart to you is that we're about conceptual innovation. There's a whole lot of work being done in technological innovation in our organisation. But if we don't start thinking about the way we are going to fight, if we don't start thinking about the way we are going to operate, then we're going to be there with a whole bunch of good kit that doesn't necessarily achieve strategic objectives. And our last point is we need to think about new methods. I was struck by Michael Shoebridge's excellent points there about the relationship between academia, industry and defence, and also the caveats that we need to think of. But I'm going to put to you that we need to do some small things and fail quick, then improve, and then get better at it, because I think that if we caveat ourselves out of creating relationships, then we'll never get there at all. So they're the three key messages I'd like to come across today. Can I talk to you about a time way back in history where ideas did make a big difference? In about the 25th century BC, the Sumerians started to develop a phalanx as their predominant form of infantry formation. By about the 8th century BC, that had caught on with the Greeks, and the Greek phalanx became known as one of the greatest war-fighting machines. The Romans then picked that up. And by the 7th century AD, the Romans too had developed a phalanx. And for those who aren't familiar, really a phalanx is a big, if I could demonstrate this manually, a big wall of humans coming at you, shields, spears, and they would simply roll over, come into contact, and whoever won the push won the battle. That worked pretty well on the plains of Greece. But when you took it into the Roman hills, it didn't work quite so well. If you imagine trying to keep a formation of people steady, moving forward over uneven ground. So the Romans came up with a tactical innovation and created the Maniple Legion. And what the Maniple Legion did was it took that phalanx and broke it into small pieces, down into groups of about 80 to 20, depending on how well the campaign was going at that particular time, and arrayed them in a checkerboard formation in three basic ranks. And what that allowed the Romans to do was to have their pieces, or their maniples, moving at different speeds over that terrain, and allowed them to keep still a relatively constant front. Importantly too, because these maniples were split, they were able to move side to side, backward and forward, and do so quite flexibly, much like your hand does, thus maniple. It also allowed the Romans to counter Hannibal's great weapon of mass destruction, the elephant, by simply moving only the elephant down the middle and chucking spears into its side. All of that came about not because of any change in technology. All the technology was the same. There was a slight change in the equipment scales, but no change in technology. A slight change in training, and obviously a big change in leadership, but the key change was in the way they thought about warfare. Ideas are really important, but they're also very vulnerable. Ideas can be strangled at any point in the process. Perhaps at the handover, where someone has this great idea and that's theirs, they're formed up, they've now got to give it to somebody else. And then get strangled because they don't like it. Or as it moves through the committee system, it needs to change and it needs to morph and it needs to compromise in order to fit in. The idea then may become completely indistinguishable, completely opposite to what was actually proposed in the first instance. So we'd put it to you that one of the key things we've got to do is to protect our ideas and help generate them. And one of the ways that we're hoping to be able to generate and protect our ideas is through good evidence.
Ladies and gentlemen, over about the next 3 slides, I'll follow on the theme of evidence, in particular evidence being hard to find, and I'll pose 3 questions to you throughout. First one being, what constitutes evidence about the future? Some provide reasonable basis for decisions, demography, climate models and the like. But in reality, a lot of it is generally fuzzier and takes weight for aggregation. And some examples of this might be the Failed States Index or technology maturation assessments. Others remain, of course, generally opinion. And in my work, doing experimentation work in particular, seldom am I not surrounded by opinion. Finding the right opinion, though, is sometimes the difficulty. Accurate and authoritative opinion that takes weight. Combine this with the search for evidence with forecasting or predicting what the future will look like is difficult and complex. Arguably, making a valid evidence-based argument on a prediction in the future is near impossible or impossible itself. Instead, what we're seeking to do is consider variations, if this, then this, looking at a variety of variations, recognising the indicators for change and minimising that risk being key. At the end of the day, rigorous, evidence-based decision support is fundamental. More objectivity and less subjectivity. How do we gather the evidence, though? Assessment and evaluation is key. We learn from our experiences, of course. This is very much for here and now for the moment. We also source respected advice and opinion, as I've briefly gone through. But we also seek to evaluate our ideas for the future, test them, and then analyse them to produce that rigorous, evidence-based decision support. This is also, we also need to recognise that this is a deliberate process and it also takes time. And key here is problem scoping and forecasting the decision support over time to ensure that that decision support hits the decision maker at the right time so that it is actionable and relevant. Experimentation is only one means of generating that decision support. And I'll quickly highlight that experimentation supporting our senior decision makers needs to obviously be evidence-based, but also generating contestable analysis to achieve that joint force by design. And key areas of decision support can be focused around the Defence Capability Assessment Program or the Integrated Investment Program in regards to capability investment, capability trade-off, and balance of investment decisions. But even more granular, looking at the force itself, the force for our future. Structure, posture, preparedness, and importantly, integration of our joint force. But I ask you, if you have the evidence, would anyone listen? What can make your evidence or the analysis compelling is the key question here. And as head force design indicated earlier, making the complex simple and the simple compelling is our key task. Easy said, difficult to deliver, but that is our job. Ensuring that we can provide decision support to the right senior leadership where we can validate their judgment with objectivity or support them in making that decision is key. So it needs to have value. And how are we generally generating that value? By looking at the sensitivity between the variations, looking at what we can do, what we can't do, and actually contextualising what those limitations mean. And looking at in particular model and model variations where the stress comes into the model as you're applying and ratcheting up the stress, We'll look at where the friction points can be identified and what the catalytic elements are to generating a fracture in the model. From there, we can also look at the limitations and ideally where the inherent risks are in that particular test and producing that evidence base back. That's just the start of the challenges we face in our sectors, and collectively I'd argue that our mutual goal to generate an effective defence of Australia and its interests through a well-designed force is key. I'll now hand over to David. We'll quickly go on with the challenges.
Yeah, because that point that Andy brings up about would people listen is really, really critical for us as a branch. We can lay out all the models we want, but if we can't educate the intellect of our senior officers to get them to understand there's more out there, there are more options available, then they'll go in equipped with the ideas that they have today. For us, as a task, that would almost be mission failure. We've got two meta challenges in the branch. The first is working with others is to be influential in defence policy. We need to be helping to understand what those big questions are, testing the assumptions of our existing policy. We need to be thinking very much about what the problem is and defining what that problem might be, helping them to translate their thoughts into actionable decisions, decisions they need to take and perhaps decisions they don't need to take. We also need to be ensure that we are doing the right things. It'd be nothing worse for the ADF to have its Kodak moment, where we've got so good at something that no one in the world can challenge us in the market, yet for that to be the absolute wrong thing to be doing right now. The second meta challenge for us is to innovate in peacetime. Fortunately, there's a good body of literature that helps us understand what makes or gives a force the ability to innovate in peacetime. For me, it's a lot about good ideas. And I'll talk a bit later on about how I want those to be feeding in to shaping senior decision making. But we know we've got to overcome the burden of proof. The burden of proof rests with the innovator. They're the ones who've got to get people to accept their ideas and to carry them forward on their behalf. We also know that we need to overcome inertia. I think in times we are still a force that's building outwards. HFD mentioned earlier on that tension between are we just going to improve what we're doing and get better and better and better at it, or are we going to take a quantum leap and build towards it? Hopefully what our branch can do is identify what might be out there for us to build towards. Also, dealing with uncertainty is a critical aspect of what we need to do when innovating. At the moment, if I can conceptualise it this way, we've got two basic ways of dealing with uncertainty. Using a type 1 way of dealing with uncertainty, you build the balanced force. Everything can do everything, everything's multi-rolled. And you do that so that you can hopefully not be too far wrong. The other way of dealing with uncertainty is to think about prototyping, experimentation, building little bits, so that when you appreciate the fight that you're going to get into, you are close enough to be able to build the force rapidly to get to where you were or where you need to be for that particular enemy. So they're very different challenges. We've, I think in the ADF, have very much focused on a type 1 approach. The question is, and I probably actually think that's probably the way we've got to go, because it's quite plausible that we are now within the warning time that we might need to be in order to develop a force for what it actually needs to do to protect Australia's interests. So thinking about those are all pretty critical for us and pretty critical for what we do. That gives us two big tasks. Hang on, lost that. That gives us those two big tasks, and then gives us then the roles that we might need to play within force design, within force analysis branch.
Thanks, David. I'll quickly cover off on the concepts and the experimentation directorates. First of all, the joint concepts. Our joint concept section produces concepts in around the 2035 timeframe at present, and their prime concept is the Australian Joint Operating Concept, which guides our current force development on the how we fight. And this section produced at the end of last year 3 key bodies of work: the Australian Joint Operating Concept, the Future Joint Operating Concept or FJOC, and the Future Operating Environment or the FOE. This year, they're really more focused on supporting and functional concepts, and examples of those is collaborative work with, in regards to the Joint Command and Control concept, and also joint personnel recovery. Noting as well, this directorate also works tightly with inside the Five Eyes community, reviewing and also collaborating together on bodies of work of which has like outcomes. And they're also working towards building a community of experts and discussion groups across the key topic areas in defence. And eventually, it's anticipated they'll work with whole of government and trusted partners. An example of this at present is the Head Start Futures work, looking at the futures exploration, which is currently underway, and that will then progress later next month into its first war game. But the key here though, is need to find a better way to disseminate the core products across defence and the wider audience. Ideas, and making those ideas actionable that are strategy-led and concept-informed, the force design is key. And the body of that work in the review and also red teaming provides that constant improvement. And there's great opportunity, I believe, there for industry and also academia to be part of this collaborative, collective group for defence and also on the global scene. Into my directorate area for joint experimentation. The role of the Joint Experimentation Directorate is to lead and coordinate the joint experimentation framework. It does through the Joint Experimentation Program, which synchronises both joint and service experimentation, but it also, through this directorate, it delivers experimentation support in the 4 study line areas that you can see up on the slide. First of all, supporting the Defence Capability Assessment Program with the Headlight series, supporting futures work with the Head Start series. A large area of work will be in future options and integration testing of the future objective force, and also at stream capability manager level, recognising their specific issues of program, project, product, or that more tactical nature experimentation to support capability managers at the centre that don't have their own organic experimentation capability. The Directorate also collaboratively supports service experimentation, recognising that near all military experimentation is joint in context and the participation, following the logic thread of we fight as a joint force. My key message for you today, though, is we need to maximise opportunities and leverage expertise for mutual benefit. The military experimentation is a specialised area. It's relatively complex in nature, and areas that we need to improve upon is and learn as we're doing at present is work to support the Defence Capability Assessment Program, in particular that FSR-like modelling and options testing to bed that in. But I also recognise there's a wealth of experience and knowledge seated in the room and with your organisations. We don't have all the ideas and necessarily all the knowledge of how to execute. And we'd be seeking to collaboratively work with academia and industry on the best way forward. And at the end of the day, we're after that improved decision support outcomes focused generally in the strategy and the conceptual phase of the CLC. My key challenge, though, is what I'd like to highlight today centres on improving the modelling, the methods and the tools for experimentation, or MMT. The second order challenge is increasing the experimentation capability or capacity, and I'll leave this for discussion tomorrow, as I know it's a presentation tomorrow. But we need to simply use better modelling methods and tools to service the decision support requirements in removing or reducing the subjectivity and increasing more objectivity. And I'll highlight four key areas where I see that we can make improvements and I'll be seeking collaboration support with. First is modelling the operating environment, scenario and the force, especially in the future timeframe. It's inherently complex, time-consuming, but by improving the modelling methods and the tools, I see we'll be able to provide a means to more effectively test and generate that objectivity, but more efficiently gain the data for the analysis and a rate of effort and capacity that is required. But at the end of the day, it supports evidence-based, contestable decisions. Second area is modelling and testing for soft kill or effects. For example, cyber, electronic warfare, space and so forth. At both the operational and tactical levels is an area of significant development. Generating hard kill simulation information, especially at the tactical level, between sensors and shooters is generally easy and known. But it's these softer areas for the delivery of those effects, those softer effects, but at the tactical and operational level, which is desired and of greater interest, especially when wargaming joint force application by both red and blue forces at the higher tactical and operational levels. Third is that flexible tools integration is a must. Simulation for experimentation or analytical wargaming needs to have an open architecture to efficiently enable platform integration for the test area. This problem is not about building a simulation platform and using the simulation platform, but it's more about the systems integration and integrating both simulation platforms, user interfaces, the data capture tools, the entity data generation, but more importantly, building the simulation environment with the various terrains. And finally, I'll leave you with an area which I've identified for improvement is supporting contracted or collaborative academic and industry partners with valid modelling context, increasing your efficiency and enabling you to move forward with specific operations, systems or technical analysis tasks that you're undertaking. I trust that I've provided you a few sound bites now in the experimentation area, and I look forward to engaging with you. And if you need to, please communicate with us at joint.experimentation@defence.gov.au, or please feel free to see me and my team out at the Joint Experimentation Framework signage outside.
And to continue to pick up on Andy's point about us not being the experts in the analysis, but the providers of the analysis, we also have a lessons function. Give us a wave, lessons. There they are. They run a process on behalf of the department, which is responding to a now historic ANAO requirement or recommendation that we start learning from our experience and then start translating that into actions that change what we do. So the lessons team run a process where we bring together all the thinking across the department, identify lessons, learn from them, and then learn how we're going to apply to change. Of course, the big challenges they have is making sure we're getting the right lessons brought up. In other words, they're relevant to Defence's challenges now. They've also ensuring that we've got to be answering the right questions. And this is of course quite difficult. It's one thing to have all those questions out there. It's another thing of the material that's coming up towards you. So our job there is to synthesise it, ask, draw out, record, and then display so that experts can actually use it. One of the key challenges for this group is going to be finding the right ways and finding the best ways to use the masses of information that are out there about what we've done and translating that then into something useful. How we go about that is, again, a task that would be really worthwhile talking to industry about. And I'll also put another way that we might be able to talk to industry in particular about a bit later on in our conclusion. My home directorate, Joint Doctrine, is all about developing judgment within our commanders, staffs and operators about best practice about joint operations. We're here to, again, synthesise the knowledge of the organisation, codify it, and then present it back so it can be used in education, in professional development, and also in staff processes, so that we are embodying best practice in what we do. We've got some key challenges, and I'll just outline two of them here today. The first one is to move doctrine further up and earlier into the capability life cycle. At the moment, doctrine tends to lag the introduction of capability, sometimes by years. We need to change that so that when the next fat ship hits the water, there's some doctrine there so that people can experiment with it, practice, train, and so that we can realise the vision of what the purchasers and the designers intended for it through the operations by the organisation. The second one is to do more about how we validate and test our doctrine. When I'm often asked about the challenges in this role and the role of Joint Doctrine, it generally dwells around process, budgets, HR. They're not the challenges. The challenge for us is our doctrine sufficiently robust enough to deal with the fight that we're going to encounter? We've got to get better at testing and validating what we do there. We think across all those four areas, and there's two other areas of our our branch that I haven't mentioned: preparedness, which looks at the current force in being, and also information management. And I've left those two organisations out today because I really wanted to focus on our force design contribution. But we think there are some ways that industry, academia, and not-for-profits can work with us, and that we can work better with you.
Thanks, Dave. Working better together, delivering on our function, meeting our ambitions to analyse the ideas, generating that evidence for force design, and addressing our priorities will rely on new forms of collaboration, and in particular that communication and the partnership with academia, not-for-profits and the industry. This will start with things we need to do. We need to help you to know our questions we want to answer, but moreover, better understand your capabilities and capacity to support and collaborate with. We need to advise you on how our views of the future, the definitions of capability, and other key elements of our thinking have changed. And I'll offer to you, we need to have less secrecy from our viewpoint and more discussion with you. An openness, a collaboration to build on effective, continual two-way communication.
So how might we do that? Firstly, we think there's an opportunity to involve industry and lessons. Lessons are a fundamental input to capability. Why not bring you into the way we do lessons? We also think there's better ways to engage academia and industry in our futures concepts. Now, I think we don't do too badly here, but we've got to make sure that we're able to really bring people in who are having different ideas and find good ways to engage them. Of course, we can always offer teams to come out and speak to particularly associations or to universities about what we're doing, what we're thinking, and likewise finding more opportunities like this here today where you can come to us and we can share information and ideas. Moving into things that may be a little more challenging, a little more radical, putting out our concepts there for peer review. Is there a way, is there a method that we could push our draft concepts out there and get your ideas and your inputs? And perhaps even going one step further, and again, I pitch this in the context of our concepts work, our far future work. Is there potentially ways where we could embed people from industry and academia in our concept section to work with us and co-design and co-evolve these concepts as we go along? Now, there's a few caveats that need to be placed in there, and also a few processes we need to think through. But as I said right at the beginning, I'd rather do something and fail small, fail quickly, and then improve the way we do things. So the idea that I'm putting forward there is we really have a good discussion, and maybe in the Q&A or in the breakout areas, to have a talk about how might we do that. What would be attractive to industry? What would be attractive to academia? How can we make it work so that all interests are protected? In conclusion, Force Analysis Branch is part of that great national enterprise that brings prosperity and security to the Australian people. We've got a role, as Jason said earlier, to play in the first, and we've got a contribution to make in delivering the second. We deliver that contribution through ideas and through evidence. How we build that is going to be important to understand the way that we can help promote innovation within the force. Now, we are in a period of peace at the moment, and that does frame the thinking about our challenges, but it doesn't diminish the effort that we need to make to them, to solving them. The main agreement for us, the main aim for us goes back to this quote from Stephen Peter Rosen out of his excellent book about winning the next war. He talks to us about the way that we need to enable our leaders to lay out a vision and to support that vision. We in Force Analysis Branch can't support that, then we're probably not achieving our particular job. And we hope to achieve that, again, through providing ideas and evidence for force design. Thank you all very much. Thank you, mate.